Nicole Odom-Hardnett is President and CEO of Focus Point Solutions, LLC. Nicole has demonstrated great insight into what makes an organization thrive. Sharing this knowledge through RIA services and consultations, she provides clients with innovative solutions. Beyond business success, Nicole brings her passion for community service to the forefront. Through Focus Point Behavioral Health, which she is in the process of franchising, she bridges community and organizational needs for behavioral health agencies, ensuring exceptional quality service.
Well, Nicole, thank you so very much for taking time out of your very busy day to talk to us at the Black Experience. You know, as you know, the Black Experience is about telling the stories of successful people of color like yourself to inspire and empower young people and to help eliminate racism. So it's an absolute pleasure to get a chance to talk to you about your life and your career. So thank you so very much.
No problem. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm excited about it.
So am I. So am I. One of the things that what I like to do is starting out is talking about your foundation, your growing up, your parents, your grandparents, your influences in the community, and positive and negative, but really the roots of who you are and where you sort of came from. Can we start there?
Sure.
Wonderful. So then tell me where you were born and raised, and just tell me a bit about your family.
Okay. So I was born in Fort Lee, Virginia. So I am a military child, or a military brat, as most like to say.
Yes.
My mother is a civilian in the government, or she's retired now. My father was in the Army. So I was born on a military base. I grew up in Fort Lee, in Hopewell, which is right down the street from Fort Lee. And
Hopewell that's near Petersburg, is that correct?
That's correct. That's
okay.
Correct.
Okay.
So I grew up in Hopewell. I spent my summers in Dinwiddie and Petersburg. And so my mother, she was raised also in Hopewell, Virginia, with great aunt and great uncle, because her mother passed away when she was 12.
Okay.
So she was raised after her mother passed away by her aunt and uncle. And while my mother went back to school and was working, then I was raised partially by my great aunt and great uncle.
Okay.
My father was enlisted in the Army, and he was stationed overseas for a great deal of time while I was growing up. So I didn't see him much. So I guess you could say I was primarily raised by my great aunt and uncle. So I learned a lot from that fabulous couple. My great uncle worked back then. He was retired, as far as I can remember, because he was always home. He was the loan shark of the neighborhood. Everyone came to our house to get loose cigarettes, to borrow money, to get bailed out of jail. Our house was that house that everyone came to for everything. So we weren't rich, that I can remember, but they had it. We were comfortable.
Okay.
From what I can remember. My mom worked hard. Sometimes she worked 2 jobs, but she worked for the government, and she worked her way up. My great aunt, she didn't work. So my uncle took care of her. From now looking back, what I know of things, he was retired. He received a check from working at the plant. And so she went to the grocery store every Saturday, and she took care of the couple across the street. And I helped her with that. And I look forward to helping her with that because like that was my job. And I went to the grocery store with her every Saturday, and I helped her prepare the meals for just my uncle, her, and myself. I ate pancakes every Saturday. That was my favorite, and I still am a pancake snob.
Okay. That's wonderful.
So, I had I would say a very modest and, somewhat humble beginnings. So it was nothing fancy. I'm a country girl through and through. So when I went to play with my cousins, in Dinwiddie, we were on dirt roads, barefoot, running.
Yeah. And was it just you? Did you have any siblings, Nicole?
So I have two older brothers, but they were living with their dad for a moment until they came and lived when they got a little older, or when I got a little older. We all lived together. When my mother decided that when she got a promotion, we moved from Virginia to Fort Pope, Louisiana. And that was when I think I was 11.
Okay.
No, I was 7. When I was 7, I moved to Fort Pope, Louisiana. And then my brothers came along.
Okay.
And we lived there for about 3 years.
Okay. So let me ask you this, if you don't mind me asking. So in terms of your dad, he's overseas. Where was he stationed? Like Germany or?
He was in Germany. He was in Frankfurt, Germany.
Okay.
And then I think it was in Mannheim for a while. Okay. I didn't go over there until I was like 12 or 13.
Okay.
I went over and I went to school for a while, and that was something special.
Okay.
I just know that I did not learn any German. I failed German horribly. That was the hardest language. It was harder than French or Spanish for me.
So early on, your dad felt that your parents felt it'd be better for you to stay with your mom in terms of moving you to
right.
Germany. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't see my dad. Our relationship was not so great. He would come to town and he would say that he was going to come visit me, but then he wouldn't show up.
Okay.
So it was one of those types of things. So I wouldn't see him very often. Now I can remember going to South Carolina, where his family is from, and I can remember spending time with them for, I think, a summer or two, or some weeks during the summer. It wasn't very often. I can remember, though, that's where my first driving experience with my grandfather's pickup truck. And I was definitely underage and I should not have been driving, but it was my first driving experience.
That's great. So tell me then, all right, Nicole, so tell me then you're in Virginia, Hopewell, up until you're about 10 or 11. No, 7.
7, yep.
You moved to Louisiana. So tell me, what do you remember about what was the community like in Hopewell in terms of race, in terms of socioeconomic? What was that? What do you remember about Hopewell?
Oh my gosh. It was very, very poor. It was no big houses, still dirt roads. I was still outside playing until the street lights came on. It was not, it wasn't the best of living situations. I mean, I think everyone back then kind of owned their own homes. This is your, late 70s?
Okay.
Yeah, late 70s.
Okay. So, and it was Hopewell predominantly Black?
Yes, it was predominantly Black.
Okay. And moving to Louisiana, you were there for how many years? You said 3?
About 3 years. Yep,
okay.
She was stationed there for 3 years.
Okay, from 7 to 10. And then let me just jump forward for a second. Where did you go after Louisiana?
We went to Maryland.
Okay. All right. So Louisiana. So tell me, So it's you and your mom moved to
Hmm.
Louisiana?
Yep. And
And
then my brothers came along then.
okay. And do you recall why your mom decided to move to Louisiana?
She applied, she became, I don't know what ranking she was at that time, but she applied for another position in
In
the
the government.
government.
Okay.
Yep, she's a civilian in the government, and she applied for another position. She was awarded that position and she moved.
Okay. And what do you remember about where in Louisiana were you, Nicole?
We are in DeRidder, Louisiana. She was stationed at Fort Pope.
Okay, I'm not that familiar with Louisiana, so tell me what's the
So
nearest
we're
big
near,
city?
Fort, DeRidder is near Shreveport.
Shreveport. Okay, all right.
And we're not far, because I remember going to Shreveport. I remember going to New Orleans. So I went to the Mardi Gras for the first time. We traveled up to Dallas. So I went all around Texas, which is
And
where I live now.
well, okay. And so what do you remember about Louisiana? I mean, how was it? Was it different from being in Hopewell? Do you remember?
I was still able to play outside. I was in a mixed community
Okay.
then. My best friend at that time was a little white girl named Tina. Uh-huh. So we were in a mixed race community, and everyone played with everyone.
Okay.
It still was not the richest of communities. It was, a pretty, I guess, mid-level
Okay.
community.
So this is like the late 70s, right? So you're saying, do you remember was race, you talked about being in a mixed community there in Louisiana.
Mhm.
Do you remember, was race a factor at all? Do you recall, Nicole?
Not that I can recall then. When I had my little best friend, I didn't have any problems. I was welcomed into her house. Her parents were nice to me. I don't know if because I picked the right friend to have. I don't know, but I remember having sleepovers at her house,
Okay.
and everything was fine.
Okay, good. All right. No,
Mhm.
thank you for answering that. So now your brothers join you, and how much older are they than you?
One brother is 6 years, and the other one is 8 years.
Wow. Okay. All
Mhm.
right. So they're in high school,
Right.
okay. So after Louisiana, where do you guys go?
We go to Maryland.
Okay. And where in Maryland?
We moved to Fort Meade, and we stay in a hotel until my mother decides where she's going to move. And we stay in a hotel for about, I don't know, maybe it's about a month.
Okay.
And then we end up moving to Randallstown,
Randall.
Maryland.
Okay. And where is Randallstown again? What's the
So
nearest big city?
Randallstown is, let me see how far from Randallstown is maybe 40 miles from Washington, D.C.
Okay. And again, your mother decides to move to Maryland because of a new government job.
A new government job. She's still working in the government, and she's just moving up the ranks.
Okay. And your older brothers come with you to Maryland?
Yep, they come with me. They are in high school and they are about to graduate.
Okay. And at this point, again, how often are you seeing your dad?
By this time, it's probably really not at all. Years go by
Okay.
without me seeing my dad. We have some communication, but it's very, very little. I have problems with him and his wife.
So he got remarried. Okay.
Yes. Well, he was never married to my mother.
Okay.
He was never married to my mother. His wife decided they had a baby together. So I do have a stepsister, which she and we get along perfectly. Actually, she's at my house now. She decided to move to Texas.
Right.
And so we are close.
And what happens to you talk so fondly of your great aunt and great uncle there in Hopewell? Do you see them much? Are they still, how much longer do they live?
While we're in Louisiana, I don't see them much. So I think the 3 years goes by, I don't see them much. We communicate often. By the time we move to Maryland, we see them more.
Okay.
My great uncle passes away first.
Okay.
A year later, and he dies from cancer because he was a smoker.
Okay.
So I grew up in a house where smoking was common every day.
Okay.
And my great aunt passes a year later.
Okay. And this is in the early 80s or
This
late 70s?
is by the 90s.
90s. Okay.
They passed. Yeah.
Okay. So
yeah,
now,
this is like early to mid 90s that she passes.
okay. So how long do you guys stay in Maryland?
My mother retires from Maryland. She applies for one more promotion. But by this time I'm in my probably late 20s, early 20s. So I'm basically on my own by this time. She goes overseas. She goes to Bamberg, Germany. And I go and visit, but I'm able to come back because I'm on my own by this time.
So you go to high school in Maryland?
Yes.
Okay. And where do you guys end up living when you go to high school? Where are you living, Nicole?
We're still in Randallstown.
Randallstown. Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me about Randallstown. What was that like again in comparison to Hopewell and then in Louisiana? What was that community like?
When I grew up in Randallstown, it was I would say almost a predominantly Jewish high school.
Okay.
With I would say it may have been 30% of other.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, minority.
Okay, so in terms of minority, what, Black or Hispanic?
Black, Hispanic,
okay.
Asian.
Okay, so it's predominantly Jewish. That's interesting. So,
yeah.
So
but now it's predominantly African American.
Okay, but
like
so
99%.
Okay, so growing up, so obviously, if the school is predominantly Jewish, then I would assume that the neighborhood was predominantly Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so two things. One, what was that like? And what made your mother decide? I know she had work, but in terms of that community, was there something that drew her to that community, or was it just it was closer to work?
It wasn't closer to work. So it took her on some days close to an hour to get to work. I don't know if someone told her that this was going to be the best area for us as far as schools,
Mm-hmm.
because when she moved to that area, I was in elementary school.
Right. Okay.
So the schools were great because, again, it was a mixed population
Mm-hmm.
of kids. Of course, weighing on the more Jewish population at that time, weighing heavily on that side. So it was a good school area, but as far as me learning about, African American culture and history and things, that was like non-existent for me.
Yeah. So what was it like in terms of being in a predominantly Jewish school, in terms of acceptance and your relationships? What was that like, Nicole?
I didn't have any problem with being accepted. I've always been able to fit in and be myself wherever I am. It was, I guess back then we didn't have that whole hate situation and, all of that like you see now,
Mm-hmm.
Which is odd considering the time. Everyone pretty much got along with everyone. So it wasn't a big deal that you were a different color or ethnicity or your culture was different. It really didn't matter.
Okay.
And it wasn't necessary cliques, because I had friends that were Jewish. I may not have hung around them as much as I did my African American friends, but we still all got along.
Okay. So what was Nicole like in high school? Tell me.
Nicole was a fashionista. That was
All right.
Nicole. I was definitely, I took my education seriously, but I didn't take it as seriously as I probably should have. And when I say that, what I mean is I didn't know what I wanted to do when I graduated. I had all these things. I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to be a lawyer. I thought about being a nurse, but I couldn't hone in on any career path. I was capable of doing all of those and probably some of those simultaneously. But my mom, she didn't go to school right after high school.
Okay.
My dad went into the military. So I didn't have anyone else to put me on a direct path of anything. It was like anything that I put my mind to, I could do. Anything I watched someone do, I could pick up and I could pretty much do it.
Okay.
So things kind of came easy for me. I wasn't much of a studier, but I got good grades. I was on the A, B, maybe 1 or 2 C's, and that was pretty much without studying.
Okay. So tell me then, because after high school, did you go on to college?
No, I worked.
Okay, you worked. So I was
Yeah.
going to ask you about that. So was college, was that something that you would, when in high school, were you thinking about college? And then you decided not to go because you wanted to work instead?
So I thought about college. I wanted to go, but it frustrated me because I didn't know what to go for.
Okay.
I didn't apply. In my senior year, I got into, I guess it may have been a little bit before my senior year, I got into this bad girl phase where I had a boyfriend and he was like the no good style boyfriend. I was dating the drug dealers and, doing those type of things.
And let me interrupt for a second. Why? What drew you to him in that particular lifestyle?
It was just intriguing. It wasn't that I needed the money or anything like that. It was just interesting. It was out of the box. It was just another skill I wanted to master because I actually helped him in his craft.
Wow. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And what at this point, you're a senior, what point, what's your mother saying? And are your brothers around? Are they sort of, reaching out to you and saying, Nicole, you shouldn't be doing this? Or again, what's your mother's reaction to that, your situation?
I kind of, I don't know if my mother knew or if she just turned a blind eye, or I really can't say.
Okay.
Because I didn't flaunt the things that I had or the money that I had, but I was the type of girlfriend that would say, okay, you need to invest your money. You need to put your money here. You need to do this, or you shouldn't go outside with this, or, I was always, even though I was a teenager, I was always like way ahead.
And was he much older than you,
No, he
Nicole?
was actually a little younger than me.
Really? Okay.
Mhm.
And yes, good.
I was just on a whole nother level, and I always just wanted to learn new things and different things.
And if you don't mind me asking, what was he selling at that time?
He was selling cocaine.
Okay. So, and how long did this period last?
I dated him for probably 2 years.
2 years. Okay. And so this is your senior year, and then what, like a year after?
This is the year before my senior year. And so it's my 10th and my 11th grade year.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay. And at what point, when did you decide that you were going to move on from that? Was there an event that occurred, or what happened, Nicole?
So he actually cheated on me, and I found out, and I left him alone.
All right. And so the business, once you broke up with him, you had no interest in the business at all. Was that correct?
No, I actually dated someone else that was still doing the same thing, but he was just older than me.
Okay.
But at least this one had a business. He had a hair salon.
Okay. So again, when you think back on it in retrospect, this is over a 2-3 year period. What do you think drew you? I know you said you were interested in learning different things, but obviously something is illegal, and it sounds like you grew up with pretty firm parents, or mother, great aunt, great uncle. What do you think drew you to this for such a prolonged period of time, Nicole?
I don't know. I don't know what it was that made me, or that allowed me, because I was involved, but I wasn't involved.
Okay.
Because I wasn't on the street selling anything or doing anything. I was behind the scene, and I was honestly like an advisor. Which is crazy when I sit back and I look at my life and just say, wow, I could have been caught up so many times.
Yeah.
And, being in a house or an apartment or wherever, with this stuff. And, thank God I was never arrested or anything, but just, I don't know. I really don't have an answer. I don't know. I don't know if it was a lifestyle, just the fast paced, or just the hype of it, or the excitement. Because there is no real excitement if you're not out there on the street and you're not handing it off to someone.
Right.
If you're just behind the scene and you just know that this is what someone is doing. So I don't know what it is.
So at this point now, with the second boyfriend, can I assume then that, again, does your mother know, or is she still turning a blind eye?
Yeah, I'm absolutely sure she has no idea what he is doing.
Okay.
Because he has the salon, and he had a food truck. So he had businesses. So he did something with his money.
Okay. All right. So how long did that relationship last?
This relationship lasted about a year and a half, almost 2 years.
Okay. And then what happens, Nicole?
Unfortunately, he was killed in a motorcycle accident.
Okay. And then what did that do for you?
Oh my gosh. It made me look at life a whole lot differently. It was very hard for me, because actually he was on his way to pick up my ring. We were about to get engaged. So it was very traumatic for me.
Yeah. So again, you're still in Maryland,
Yep.
and so once he tragically dies, what do you do next, Nicole?
So it took me a while to get over that.
And are you living, when he passes away, you were living with him at that time?
Yes, we were living together. So I had to, revamp my living situation. So we were living upstairs from my brother and sister-in-law.
Okay.
So I moved downstairs with them. And I actually went to school. I went to a trade school. So that was my first time in school. I went to a trade school in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
I went to school so it was called the Boys School of Business and Travel.
Okay.
And of course, I did not take the business aspect of it, the business. I took the travel. So, and of course, I aced it. I graduated with a 4.0. So, education was never a thing for me. It was never hard for me. But when I graduated, I had a hard time finding a job. Everyone asked for experience. And, you're coming out of school, you don't have any experience.
Right.
So I tried something else. I went to school, become a CNA, GNA, passed that flying colors, and then became my career. Now I have over 20-something years experience in the healthcare industry. And I just built upon that. Yeah. And that set in. I love that industry from me going back to when I was with my great aunt going across the street and helping that elderly couple because I used to feed them. Mm-hmm. I used to help her fold their clothes and do light housekeeping with her at a very young age. And I enjoyed doing that. I looked forward to doing that. And as a CNA, GNA, that was very hard work. It wasn't like helping.
Tell me what those initials stand for, Nicole.
Certified nursing assistant.
Okay.
Or geriatric nursing assistant.
Okay. So when you look back, again, you've talked about your great uncle, your great aunt, your mom, your dad, your brothers. When you look back on it, were there, in terms of people who sort of early on, your role models, your champions, your mentors, people who sort of believed in you, can you look back and identify people like that, Nicole?
My mother has always told me that, you can do anything that you set your mind to. And I truly believe that if I just focus and concentrate on whatever it is I want to do, I know I can do it. I just have to shut out all the other noise around me. Mm-hmm. and just go for it. My aunt always told me, you can be anything you want to be. So I've always been surrounded by positive people. Mm-hmm. I don't fill my circle with negative energy.
Yeah.
Don't believe in that.
Yeah.
And that's how I think that I've been able to be successful.
So there really wasn't, besides your mother and your great aunt, there really wasn't any other outside influences, you feel? I mean, you were sort of a self-starter, and you sort of relied on those 2 points of view. Would that be correct?
I worked in a clinic in Cherry Hill, and I had an administrator, and I believe her name was Miss Williams. And she was one of the best women that wasn't related to me, that motivated me. I came in as a a referral coordinator. And I used to go to meetings at Mercy Hospital in Maryland. I'm in Maryland right now because this is where my clinics are. And we used to go to these meetings, and I didn't have any education at all, no, except for my CNA, GNA. So they were just like certificates. And the meetings, I would sit at a round table with all these doctors and nurses. So everyone had a degree except for me. And they were talking, and I knew what they were talking about because I, knew the medical terminology. And I had been in the medical field for a couple of years by that time. But they were doctors and nurses, and I held them, way up because they had been to school and they had degrees. But they were asking me questions, and I was able to answer their questions. And so I was answering, and we were having a dialogue. And when I left the room, I felt so empowered. And after those meetings, I was unstoppable.
And this Miss Williams was helpful in that regard?
She was. Yeah. She was, because she took me to those meetings, knowing that I had no type of degree, nothing. And she allowed these people to ask me all types of questions as if, I was, I had a doctorate or, something like that, or I was a doctor or a nurse, but she was a nurse. And, I felt like, if I could sit in a room at a round table and I have absolutely no education, then I can do anything at all.
And she decided to include you. She didn't have to do this.
No.
She wanted to do this. So she saw something in you.
Something in me.
Yeah. And was she black or white?
She was black.
Okay. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And
but over her, so in another clinic, there was a Caucasian woman who also, she did the same thing. Okay. Took me to a meeting and as she started asking me questions. And then the questions piled on from other people around. And I'm like, okay, I'm meant to be here.
Okay.
I'm meant to sit at these tables.
Yeah. And the whole geriatric field, I know you talked about early on going across the street and helping with your great aunt. Did that seem really apparent to you that was the area that you would really like to focus on?
I felt comfortable. I enjoy helping people. I enjoy giving back. Yeah. That is where I just feel like that's what I'm meant to do.
Yeah.
To help people.
But specifically older people.
Not necessarily older people, because the work that I do is in, substance use and mental health.
Okay.
Even though I have owned assisted livings, but I worked with people who were dually diagnosed that are still the communities that are substance use and mental health. So I got my start with the elderly population or the senior population, but that's not where I stayed. Okay. It's just helping people of all ages. Okay. So my population now that I work with are from about 5 years old, I think is my youngest.
Okay.
My oldest maybe about 70.
Okay. So on occasion, I like to sort of ask, what if? And, if you would like to indulge me, that would be terrific. If not, that's fine.
Okay.
Tell me, what do you think back? And I know how difficult it must be when your ready to be fiance is killed tragically. if he doesn't die and you get married, he's got his businesses, but he's also selling drugs. Where do you think that would have gone for you, Nicole?
So he was, he reminds me of my current husband. He had a incredible work ethic. He was definitely not making that illegal industry his lifestyle permanently. He was definitely looking to get out.
Okay.
Hence the salon and the food truck, and we were talking about other things. And me going to school for the first time. So I don't know if I would be where I am now in this same seat, but I am confident that I would be close.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I have a drive, and some people that know me say that I'm never satisfied. I'm always thankful. I'm grateful for everything that I have and I'm blessed with, but I always want more because I know I can do more for those around me and those who come into my path.
Yeah. No, thank you. No, thank you for that. So you're saying, just to add on, that the trajectory then his trajectory, your trajectory together would have moved away from the whole drug thing.
Oh, most definitely.
All right. So tell me then, in terms of being a business owner. Now, you talked about beautifully about being in these meetings and, being surrounded by doctors and nurses and sort of absorbing and contributing to conversations. At what point in your life does the idea of being your own boss and having your own company, where does that sort of evolve from, Nicole? When does that begin to happen?
Oh, I started grad school in 2008.
Okay.
So I started a transitional home with a former grad school colleague.
Okay.
And that didn't work.
Where do you go to graduate school?
Lincoln University in Pennsylvania.
Okay, wonderful. All right.
That didn't work out. It worked out well, but of course, it's never 50-50 when you have a partner.
Yeah.
I am a workaholic. I believe in getting the job done. If that means I have to stay up almost 24/7, that's what I'm going to do. And my husband, of course, he does not like that.
Yeah. But you start this transitional
in grad school.
And just tell me, what was the impetus for that, Nicole? Why that, and at that moment, do you recall?
I don't know if it was his idea or my idea. He was working in a program like that, but it was bigger. So of course ours was smaller. It was one house. We started with male and female, which was, oh my gosh, it was a nightmare working with the women. Women for me are more difficult. We require a lot more. We want a lot more. We think we are entitled to a lot more. So it quickly changed to working with men for me. I then took over that business. So I phased out the partnership and I went out on my own. Again, I'm back into helping people.
Okay.
I think that's my calling.
Yeah. So a transitional home, what is that, Nicole?
Where you house individuals that are either coming home from prison Usually they're in some sort of outpatient drug treatment program,
Okay.
or they're maybe in a hospital, they're coming out of a shelter, or they've come home from the hospital or mental health clinic or ward, and they need housing.
Okay.
So you house them.
So now in this house, how many, do you recall, how many individuals are you caring for?
4.
4. And you're in grad school now. So who are you doing this? You and your partner, or have you hired some people to help you do this?
I had a house manager.
Okay.
Mhm.
And is that the only person who is there at the house on a regular basis?
Yes, the house manager in combination with myself.
Okay. So tell me how, I know you said you like helping people, but in terms of that situation, that seems like it could be a very strenuous environment. Sort of how did you sort of manage that while you're in school, you've got this business, but it's a very, I guess, a very emotional business, right?
It can be. It's all in choosing, and it's very important that you have a good intake process. It's good that you have a good house manager, and that you check on that house manager. You have good communication with your house manager, but that doesn't mean that things aren't going to go awry.
Yeah.
And you have to be very strict. You have to stick to your rules. Say what you mean what you say, because this population usually is known to try to get over on you, or get over on people in general.
And your money is coming from where? The state?
The state. Apply for a program, and the state usually it'll pay you for the individuals for a period of time.
Okay. So then how does that, having that one home with 4 people, and you talked about you phased out your partner, how does that sort of blossom? Where does that go from there, Nicole?
So, and I'm working also.
So you're in grad school,
and I'm working,
and you're running this transitional home. I could see why you're working 24/7. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So I phased the program into an assisted living. When I say I phase it, meaning I apply for a license for an assisted living. So I have to get the home now ready for all the requirements that the state requires for an assisted living. So you have to go through all of this stuff, meaning, fire extinguishers, use and occupancy permits, and anything else that the state requires for you to have, get it ready for licensing for an assisted living. And I did that because you get more money.
Okay. And when you were thinking about the assisted living in terms of the number of patients or residents, what did that turn out to be?
It's still the same number because of the size of the house and the square footage of the rooms. It's still the same amount of patients, but you get more money for the patients. And I could apply for a different program for the funding for the patients. Okay,
now assisted living, is that, I assume those are elderly individuals?
So I could choose to work with the elderly population, or the population that I worked with was still the same population. I was comfortable with working with, and I enjoy working with the population that I have, which is those who suffer from addiction or mental health.
Okay, because when I think of assisted living, I think of older people who, they're, I guess it's like a retirement community in some form or fashion. They don't need a lot of help, but the help is available there. So how did your situation work?
So assisted living is anyone over the age of 18 that needs assistance with daily activities.
Okay.
So they could suffer from addiction. They could be the elderly population. They could have mental health, such as bipolar, schizophrenia, or any of those other mental health diseases. So, but my population, they were suffered from addiction. And the people that I housed, they went to a program every day for outpatient. So my houses were empty all day, and my individuals came home in the mid-afternoon, evening from their program. So they were fed at their program, and then in the evening, they had dinner. All of my clients were really able to cook for themselves, but the house manager supervised everything.
Okay.
Or either I would come over in the evening and supervise their meal preparation. And then if anyone needed to go to the hospital or doctor's office or anything, there was a delegating nurse that came in, after or either before to check their records, check their medication and things of that nature to make sure everything was on point and up to par.
Okay. So let me ask you this, because I've kept you for an hour and we haven't even talked about focus point.
Okay.
So I'm hoping that at some point you'll allow me to,
Sure.
talk more about that. But let me ask you this. So you've got this transitional home, and and then you move into assisted living.
Mm-hmm.
Where did that idea come from? Was that, again, did you have someone who sort of, suggested to you might do that, or you just sort of came upon that all on your own?
No, so there was someone who actually moved on my street. So I ended up with a couple of assisted livings. And on one of the streets where I had my first assisted living, someone moved up the street from me, and they had no idea. And one of my clients introduced us to each other, the owner of the other assisted living. And they were like, okay, how are you getting your clients? What are you doing? This and that. And so I became their consultant.
Okay.
And in becoming their consultant, after, I think it maybe been like a year or so, they came up with the idea of outpatient clinic for the substance abuse.
Okay.
Because that's where all of our clients were going. I showed them my model, and I'm like, it's enough money out here for everyone. I don't have a problem with, showing someone what I'm doing. There's enough clients out here for us to house. People need housing.
Right.
So in doing that, they came up with the idea of the outpatient drug treatment. I helped them with their paperwork and their insurance information, and they got licensed somewhere else.
Okay.
In a building not too far from where our houses were.
Mm-hmm.
And I started working with them and housing their people that were in their drug treatment program. So I had more houses.
Okay.
And I'm like, okay, if I could help them with their paperwork, if I could do all of this, I could open my own. I'm like, okay, I can do this.
Yeah.
Even though I've never ran an outpatient drug treatment program, I've never been in one, but I've taken family members to one. I have sat in them for intakes waiting with family members. I have done all the outside layers of drug treatment, but I don't know the intricacies. So I hired my own consultant.
Okay.
And then so I had Focus Point Solutions, which did the transitional housing and which did the assisted living, but Focus Point Behavioral Health was birthed that time. And that's how I now have 4 clinics, and I'm in the process of franchising now.
So it's fantastic where you've ended up. So it's wonderful, and I'm looking forward to hearing about Focus Point.
So it came about because, again, I was on the same street with someone and consulting with this person and working with them. They had the idea of getting started with the outpatient, and I helped with the paperwork. And we sat down actually to work together in his venture, and it didn't work out. So my husband came into the picture because he's also a business person. He's been in business now, at that time it had been like for 20 years. So now it's probably closer to almost 30 years.
Okay.
And so he wasn't big on, my husband is the type that he has to understand where the money, how you get the money, how you make the money. He has to understand that going in, and not just understand it, like he really has to have knowledge of it.
Okay.
Where does the money come from? Who's the payer? All aspects of it. Whereas I, on the other hand, I can kind of look at something and I can kind of figure out the moving parts of it. Okay. I've been in the healthcare industry for the longest time, and I can see how things generate the money. I may not know where the money comes exactly from, but I can tell the moving parts of it. But him, it has to be very specific in order for him to go into a business venture.
Okay.
So he works, what he calls it is working backwards. And that's how we began kind of working together.
Okay.
So he was interested, but not interested at the time. So he kind of brushed off the meeting a little bit. So he listened, but he didn't listen. So he was interested, but not. So what he did with that meeting was he started asking around about this industry. So much so he took a meeting he was talking to someone that he was working with in business. And in talking with that person, that individual brought in another woman who was working in the outpatient drug treatment industry, and she had over 20 years of experience herself.
Okay.
She was working in a program. She was their clinical director. So with that being said, she became my consultant.
All right.
And then that is how I got into, that's how my drug treatment program came about. Because again, I had never ran a program such as this.
And at that point, was it called Focus Point?
So my business, even from the assisted living, I have always been Focus Point Solutions.
Okay, all right.
And then I had doing business as Nick's Place and Chris's Place. So those were the names of my houses, and I had other names along the way. So I had multiple houses under Focus Point Solutions.
Okay.
But then when we got into the outpatient drug treatment, birthed Focus Point Behavioral Health. And it was just like, okay, what are you going to name this thing? We had a meeting, and she's like, okay, so you're going to have to name it. And I said, Focus Point Behavioral Health. It was just like, yeah. It just came to me. And she said, okay, she just kept asking questions. What are you going to do? What is this? And what is that? And it just came like second nature. But she handled all of the paperwork. And I'm like, okay, why are you doing this? What is this for? What happens next? And I just kept asking questions because I wanted to know everything. I didn't want to be left in the dark. And next thing I know, I found a building. Some work needed to be done to the building to get it up to code so it would pass for the surveyor to come in. We had the fire fire inspection.
And
using
where was this, Nicole?
The first location was in Princess Anne, Maryland.
Okay.
And what she did, because again, she was in the industry, she was going to meetings. She said there are two locations, there are two areas that were very high on the list that need help. They were Somerset County, and there was an area in like off of like Prince George's area. I forgot the county.
Okay.
I can't remember the county, but it's off of I used to live in Upper Marlboro.
Okay.
So it's off of PG County in that area. And so I chose Somerset County because my husband had contracts in that area. I know ECI is a correctional, it's a big prison in that area. Then you have the water, it's a big drug transporting area in that area off the water. So I'm like, this is perfect. It was 2 hours from where I was. I was in Baltimore at that time. That's where I lived. So it was like 2.5 hour commute for me to get to the office. But I looked on, I think probably Zillow or something, at vacant commercial buildings. And when I did the Google Map search, because my undergrad is in business, location.
Yes.
I saw that it was next door to parole and probation. And I'm like, I like expanded it as large as I possibly could. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. This is vacant. And when I drove down to see it, I'm like, this is it. I put in my application. It was granted, like, I think by the end of the day. And I'm like, this is on. We're in here.
Yeah. And at that point, is your husband now also working with you full-time, part-time, or not so much?
So he is kind of like helping along the way, because I have business experience. I have, head staff and everything. It was maybe a month or two into the process where we have a conversation, because I'm thinking we're going to be partners in this. He tells me one day, oh no, you're going to do this alone. And I'm like, what? You have got to be kidding me. I'm like, I have never, I have been a director. I've been a manager of, places, but now I am president and CEO of an organization that I have never run before. And I can remember the day like it was yesterday. I walked to the gym one morning and I sat on a piece of equipment and I like broke down in tears because I was so scared. And I said, I'm going to be responsible for people's lives. And, the fear came over me. And by the end of my workout and my walk home, I was like, okay, girl, you got to suck this thing up. This is your reality now. You're in this. You have a lease for 3 years. You have filled out this application. You have major skin in the game now. And you got to put your big girl panties on. And you got to do this thing. Yeah. So, and I never looked back after that day.
So in retrospect, or even at the time, what was his reasoning? I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but why you thought he was going to be your partner and he said, this is on you. Why did what was the reasoning for that, Nicole? Do you remember?
he knew that I could do it. He knew that I had the knowledge and the experience. He had confidence in me.
Okay.
There's never been any obstacle that I have come across that, I couldn't jump over. Nothing. I've never really feared anything, but just being responsible and with this, addiction is something to fear. Being responsible, people coming to you, when they're at their lowest.
Yeah. No, so it's interesting. So it wasn't so much the fact that he didn't want to do it. He just
Right.
knew you could do it on your own.
Right. And he had no experience whatsoever with healthcare.
Okay.
None. It wasn't until probably a year, maybe almost 2 years later, he dibbled and dabbled in. Once the money started really coming in, I think it was probably about a year that he had to come in, because I am not the spreadsheet person at all. I can tell you what's needed in a business, how to start it up, how to get things going and line things up, what the staff should be doing, what someone should be doing to make the business operable. But that whole spreadsheet thing, and that's not me. He's really good at projection and forecasting of the money. I'm the accounting type person. I can tell you, I can make sure the bills are paid. I can make sure that we're not going to be in a negative ever. And we're going to save money. Everyone's going to get paid, that's for sure. But he has a whole nother skill set.
Okay.
So we work very well together.
That's fantastic. So you get this 3-year lease. So tell me then, walk me through sort of the beginnings. You get the building, you get the lease. How do you begin to attract customers, if that's the right word, or clients?
So it was a waiting process. So it wasn't easy at all. So it took a while. We're paying the bills. So fortunately, my husband had a very hefty, lucrative contract of his own. And I had money saved up for my, last position, in credit cards and things, because this was all self-funded.
Right.
So I maxed out my credit cards. And from the money he had coming in, we used that to keep the business afloat until I got licensed. I had to hire staff, because you had to have a certain amount of staff.
Okay.
There until when the business was surveyed to get the license. So I signed the lease in August of 2016. The surveyor finally came in November of 2016. The license probably came through shortly after that. Then after you get licensed, then you have to wait for your Medicaid number. The Medicaid number didn't come through until March the 13th
Of
2017.
Okay. All right.
So once that Medicaid number comes through, that's when you can actually bill and make money.
Okay.
So from August, I'm still paying rent all the way up until November, when I'm finally making some money. So I have to pay my consultant. I have to pay an office admin, and I had to pay 2 counselors.
Okay.
So I'm next door to parole and probation. So they're anxiously waiting for me to open up. And I'm saying, I don't have the timeline. I'm at the mercy of the state and, Medicaid. You can't put in your Medicaid application until you get your license. So all of this is, just hurry up and wait. Hurry up and wait. So it's very frustrating for someone who on my end doesn't know the process, and you're the owner, almost operator, and you're financing this thing, and you have people saying, okay, when are you going to open? When are you going to open? And you're like, I don't know, maybe in another couple of weeks. You're telling people this, and they have no idea the process, just like you almost have no idea the process, because you're at the mercy of the state, and they take their sweet time. They don't care if you have bills to pay and, people to pay. So it was very, very stressful. And for the faint at heart, or, the dusty pockets entrepreneurs, and those who don't have confidence in yourself and what you're doing, I have mercy on you. Because there's so many times that I really wanted to give up, and like, oh my God, I can't do this.
That's fascinating. So once you got your license, you got the Medicaid, and then you began to get clients?
Yes, they began to trickle in. And I think the reason the clients became a sort of consistent was because I didn't believe what I did before we opened is I went to some of the competitors and I act like I was, just straight off the street, and I wanted to see how I was treated when I went in.
Okay.
Because, I had already did my research online. I called on the phone to see, how I was treated, if they put me on hold, if things that they did. And that was in the area and outside of the area. So I try to do my research as much as I possibly can on other programs that were like mine, just to see what they were doing. And I wanted to be different.
So what did you discover, Nicole?
Some of them were really good with their customer service. Some of them were not. What I noticed, honestly, in the area that I was in, and that they had this thing where they would make the customers wait outside in a line. Okay. And I thought that was very degrading for, especially with the stigma that's placed upon those with mental health and substance use disorders.
Okay.
For someone to wait outside in a line, and if you are seen, or if you're gotten to by the time 1 o'clock comes, that's fine. If not, you're turned away for the day and you have to come back tomorrow. You have no idea what the person has gone through, if they are, at their wits' end and they're maybe about to commit suicide, or maybe they're about to OD or something like that.
And would you say what percentage of these individuals are homeless? Do you know? Or did you know?
I didn't know that, but I'm sure it's a pretty good percent of them that could possibly be.
Okay.
But what I know is I didn't like that concept.
Right. And
I heard that from a lot of clients, and I saw that quite a bit in the area that I was in. And
how did you rectify that then with your own business?
That was not acceptable. We did not do that. That is not a part of my business at all.
So does that mean you had to have sort of a large waiting room?
So we do have a nice size waiting area. We try to give anyone who calls and wants to come in, we either give them appointments or we accept you on a walk-in basis.
Okay.
So that means we are always accepting resumes, applications, and things of that nature. It was really hard for me to break down the barriers because I am in the outpatient space, am the only person of color, especially woman of color,
Mhm.
in business in that area, especially in 2016. There is another woman of color that does methadone in the area, but I was seen as an outsider, as a come here because I wasn't from the Eastern Shore. So I had to basically prove myself. And I have done so because now I have a pretty good amount of clients. I would definitely pat myself on the back for that. I would say we definitely have taken up the market share in that area, and Focus Point is, I would say, almost pretty much a household name.
Wow. Well, congratulations on that. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
So do you think, you talked about being an outsider, you talk about being maybe the only woman of color. Were most of those clinics that run by white men predominantly?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And did you feel that there was a camaraderie amongst them that didn't include you?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And that was with all the agencies and quite a few of the stakeholders as well. You know, I can remember at one time, we had a client that was sanctioned by parole and probation because they chose to come to my agency. And the client went to the court, and the judge told them that this client can't be sanctioned because that's a violation of his rights, because he chose to go to a specific drug treatment program. He has a choice. It's a right for him to make his choice. You can't tell him as an agent which program he can attend.
Okay.
Like, we weren't being put on the list at the parole and probation agencies at one time.
Interesting. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So where does Focus Point then, how does it expand, you know, after you sort of, you know, got your footing, you're starting to get, you know, clients? How does it grow? And then how do you begin to build, you know, other offices or other facilities?
So one way we expanded my clients also by going on the radio and making people aware of what was going on with the stakeholders and how people were sending people to the same organizations all the time. So that's one way of expansion. We just called people out. The other way of expansion, you know, we saw areas that were in need. So we expanded from our Francis Ann location to our Salisbury location because we saw there was a need in Salisbury, to Crisfield because we saw there was a need in Crisfield, then to Baltimore. And now we're in Texas, and we started the interviewing process first in Texas to see, you know, what kind of feedback we would get. And we are also looking at franchising. So we're in that process of franchising.
So the move from Maryland to Texas, I mean, some people might say, well, why not Washington, D.C.? Why not Pennsylvania? How'd you get from Baltimore or Maryland to Texas, Nicole?
You know, Texas is where I reside now because of I chose Texas because my husband and I, we came to several conferences here just prior to the pandemic. And we just love Texas. It was actually going to be Texas or Arizona.
Okay.
And we figured Texas, it was a shorter plane ride for both of us because both of us have businesses in Maryland. And we just really like Texas also. So
Okay.
we chose Texas. But Texas is a great business state. So we are looking at opening a location, a private location in Texas. And then, you know, the opportunity came about for franchising because we think we have this thing down to a science now. We're pretty sure that we do. And we know that there are quite a few other people who just love to serve people and help people like we do. Because I trained my husband in the healthcare field because he's a quick learner. So he took the knowledge that I was able to give him. And then he, oh my gosh, he just went wild with it and he expanded on it.
Yeah.
And so he has his own side of things that he now has really mastered.
That's fantastic.
And,
yeah.
You know, we have been able to expand like crazy. And I think, like I said, we have this thing really down to a science, and we are able to help people, you know, build whatever they would like to.
So that's fantastic. So you have the 3 existing facilities in Maryland.
We have 4 in Maryland.
4 in Maryland.
4 in Maryland.
And do you now have one in Texas, or
we're looking at a space in Texas. So that's our new project now, working on one in Texas.
And where in Texas?
It will probably be we're looking in Conroe, Texas.
And where is that? What's the next biggest city to that?
So we're not far from Houston.
Okay, Houston. Okay.
Yep.
So you've been able to, you started in 2016, really kind of, you got your license and so on in 2017. So in 5 years, you've got, 4 facilities, you're getting ready to open another one, and now the whole franchising idea. So tell me about that a little bit, Nicole, about franchising, and how does that work, and how do you see that developing for you guys?
Let's back up a little bit. I was looking at other ways to make, I always believed in multiple streams of income.
Okay.
Because my husband, he has a couple of businesses. And then he's probably, Focus Point has probably taken up a good, monopolized his time now. So I had always been looking at, thinking about, buying a franchise. And someone asked me, well, have you thought about franchising your own? Like, you have all of these offices. Why wouldn't you franchise your own? And I'm like, I never thought of that.
Yeah.
That's great. Because I know I've been on all these calls with multiple companies about franchising, like childcare centers and Tropical Smoothie Cafe, and a number of other companies that I frequent quite a bit. And so I know the concept, I know how it's done. So I'm like, okay, this is really a no-brainer. I'm like, we're accredited, so we have everything lined up. I don't have a license, but I know how I want my program to run. I have a clinical director now who is awesome, even though I had to go through 3 before her. And I somewhat stepped in with in between time when I had my bad apples, which were 2 of them prior to her. Then when I saw things weren't going right, I know enough about this industry, through family and things when things aren't going right. And I learned enough from the first one to know right from wrong. So like, I know, what to do as long as I have a clinical somebody next to me. So I'm like, okay, we can do this.
Yeah.
So it was a no-brainer. And then I'm thinking, if one of my kids doesn't step up and take this seat, and we have 7 of them, then what is the outgame? What's the retirement look like? So you have to come into a business thinking about, what's the end game? I'm not going to work forever.
Right. So franchising is the end game.
Mm-hmm.
That's
like,
fantastic.
I want to have some money coming in so I can sip me a pina colada somewhere on an island.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and this will also, this will feed. It has the potential to feed, the family for life.
Yeah.
And create billionaires.
Yeah, no, that's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
That's very exciting. So tell me your advice to young people, especially to young women and women of color. You've dealt with a lot of adversity. You've become very successful, and it sounds like you're barely at the tip of the iceberg. It sounds like there's so much more for Nicole. What advice would you give to young people, again, young women, about being a business leader, being an entrepreneur, the steps and tips that it takes to become that?
One, it's not how you start, it's definitely how you finish. Because I didn't start out by going to the 4-year university. It took me a while to pick up the speed, and I don't look over the fence. So if you're looking over the fence at, your friends that you are in school with, and you're comparing yourself to everyone else, stop it. Just do you. Do what you think is right. Because you are you, and your friends are your friends. I never have compared myself or wanted to be like anyone else. I've always been just me. Have I had some regrets? Yes. Have I beat myself up about those things? Not really. I consider myself somewhat of a free spirit. I do what makes me comfortable. I don't live for anyone else. So if you're living for someone else, stop it. And live for you. Do what makes you happy. And, sometimes it takes some people a lot longer to decide what they want to do with their lives, because I had absolutely no idea. And I found that it was okay, because even with the transition from me finishing the assisted living into my outpatient, it wasn't an immediate thing. I had to sit still. And I just kind of waited for his voice. So, if you believe in a higher power, sometimes you have to sit still and just wait, and it'll come to you. Yeah. This was definitely a calling for me, because not everyone can do what I do. I feel calm when I am around this population, and a lot of people can't do that. So as I said, don't live for anyone else. Live for you.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic advice, and obviously it's worked extremely well for you, and it's really a credit to your determination and your discipline and your get-go. And it's been an absolute pleasure to get a chance to talk to you about your life and the things you've accomplished. And I'm looking forward to reconnecting sometime soon and hearing more about Nicole's great success. I mean, it's just really, this franchising sounds fantastic. So
yeah, I'm excited about it. And pretty soon I'll be Dr. Odom-Hardnett.
Oh, wonderful. Well, Nicole, no, again, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy day to talk with us, and I greatly appreciate it.
This is the Black Experience for all. If you like what you hear at the Black Experience, please consider clicking on the Join button to support our nonprofit. I'm Adam P. Kennedy. Thank you for joining us.